Hello, I'm Jen Uphoff-Gray, founder and artistic director of Forward Theater Company in Madison, Wisconsin. And this is Theater Forward, a twice-monthly conversation about theater from a local, regional, and national perspective. From Madison to Manhattan, we're excited to share insight into our own company while exploring issues surrounding theater in the Midwest and around the country. Welcome to episode 86 of Theater Forward. For this episode, we wanted to check back in on the topic of theater education in this country, having last considered the subject in the early months of the pandemic. I am thrilled to be joined today by two incredible colleagues who work with me here at Forward and who also work as theater educators. We have Dr. Khalid Y. Long, who is an assistant professor of theater and of African American Studies at the University of Georgia. Before joining their faculty, he taught at Columbia College in Chicago. I've had the pleasure of working with Khalid as a dramaturg during our production last season of Adrienne and Adam Kennedy's Mom, How Did You Meet the Beatles? And currently on our production of Kirsten Greenidge's Feeding Beatrice, a Gothic Tale. And then we also have with us Marcella Kearns, who recently joined Forward staff, hooray, as our artistic associate. In addition to freelance work as a director, actor, and dramaturg, Marcy's an adjunct instructor at Marquette University and the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. She's also a core faculty member for First Stage Theater's Young Company. Welcome, Khalid and Marcy, two of my favorite people.
Thank you. Thank you.
It is so good to have you here, and I am really excited to dive into this conversation about what is going on in theater training programs. This has been an eventful and rocky few years in our field, and I'm excited to hear about what you are seeing in your classrooms. And so if we could just start with maybe just a little synopsis of your journey, each of you as theater educators. Khalid, I'll go to you first for that.
Yes, thank you. So it was interesting. I always like to share that I never imagined I would be where I am. And I don't mean that in the sense of I don't belong here, or I shouldn't be here. What I mean is I was not a great student. In college, it was like if I got a C in math or a C in science, I was happy with that. But I always got A's in my theater classes. So that was like, oh, this is probably what you should be doing. And I mean like all of them, from acting, directing, and even like especially theater history and dramatic criticism. And then I went to graduate school, Miami University of Ohio, and I was a TA. And part of my assignment was to teach. I was an instructor on record, like intro to theater studies, intro to theater, things of that nature. And then I ended up getting my PhD in theater and performance studies. And so just like my master's program, kept teaching and just sort of developing my craft as a dramaturg, as a professor, as a scholar. And then it was like, well, time to look for a job. And the PhD program really groomed me for academia in many ways. And it was sort of the trajectory, I guess, that I sort of figured I would take by my second year in my PhD program. And so then I was an adjunct at several schools while finishing up my dissertation. And my first tenure track position was at Columbia College, Chicago, when I started there in 2018. And then I did some really great work there. I developed a theater studies concentration, developed the dramaturgy area, and then ended up, just felt like it was time to move on to the next level. And so I ended up coming here to University of Georgia in theater studies and as well as in African American studies. So it was a joint appointment. So that's sort of like the short deal of it all.
Fantastic. And Marcy, how about you?
I started working as a theater educator through Studio Arena in Buffalo, regional theater now sadly gone, right out of college and right before I went overseas to do Fulbright in Vienna. And so over the course of the couple of years that I was back and forth coming back to the States, I was purposefully cultivating skills as an educator because I knew it was one of the hats I wanted to wear to give back eventually. But I didn't undertake it on a deeper level until I had an acting internship at the Milwaukee Rep some years later as the last part of my MFA program in acting. I worked as an in-school and at the theater educator for the Rep, for First Stage for many years, and got connected to dear Carthage College, and have been adjuncting at universities since I want to say it's about probably 2011 at this point. So I'm focused at UWM and Marquette right now, but and have discovered that I think my sweet spot is older students, but I love them all. You learn a lot from a kindergartner. So it's just one of the hats I wear, but it's also one that I feel is really important because the intergenerational connection that we have to those who are coming up in our industry is key.
Tell me a little bit also just about your work with First Stage, because that brings those high school students in as well.
Yeah. So I've worked both with in school and at the academy at First Stage, which runs year round and through the summer. But my focus is at the Young Company, which is a year round advanced training program for high schoolers. It's the only program that you have to audition for at First Stage and you might not get into. It's run right now by Matt Daniels. It was founded by John McClay originally. And along with Forward Advisory Company member Elise Edelman, the three of us are core faculty there. And we have guest artists come in to work. We're giving them as much as we can of what they might get as an undergraduate in college. So they train all through the year, but then they also have 3 performance projects throughout the course of the year with ticket sales and everything. And that's the Young Company, I think, has been a real feeder for theater artists in Wisconsin and beyond. In fact, Alex Salter, who is in Feeding Beatrice, is a former Young Company member.
Yeah, definitely a feeder. The training that those young people get in that program is really extraordinary. I always can tell, even before looking at someone's resume during an audition, if they've trained with Young Company. I'm like, yep, there it is. I see it right there in your performance. So if we could maybe start, I would love to hear your observations about how you've seen theater education evolving during the pandemic, sort of the perspective of what was it like in those early days and how is it looking now? Khalid, maybe we'll start with you again.
So it's interesting because I teach a lot of theater history, dramatic criticism courses, dramaturgy. So a lot of the heady, intellectual design courses. Dramaturgy is also a practical course, but in the context of academia and the curriculum, they see it as sort of more of a theater studies type of course, and performance studies and classes like that. I don't often teach directing or acting in some of the other practical courses because we have folks who are just especially trained in those areas, and I think they should teach those courses. And so I'm giving that background to sort of preface as a preface to say that my classes are the ones where students sometimes they don't recognize at first that that's what they should know these things. They should have these these areas as a background. And be informed about theater intellectually, critically, right? So that then informs their practical choices in their areas that they may sort of go into, be it design or performing and so forth. And so in many ways, sometimes you get the students where it's like, I'm just here to get the grade. And you're like, that's fine, we'll make this work. Oftentimes there's a moment towards the middle of the semester where the students go, oh, I did not know that. This is really interesting. And I go, yes, this is informing your practice. This is why you should be here. Great. Now it's a little different with my the straight drama courses, American drama, global drama, or something like that, right? Because, most students are there and have a sort of an interest in reading plays. Most, not all. I've had theater students who'll say, I don't really like reading plays. And I'm always sort of baffled. I'm like, well, why are you here? But I've also learned to say, you have an interest in designing, whether that's costume, lighting, so and in that world, the tech world and so forth. And so reading plays may not be your forte, but at the very least, learn how to read them so that you're able to join the discussion with, when you're at the table with other designers working on a show and so forth. And so that's sort of the thing pre-pandemic. And then the pandemic happened. We're on Zoom and everyone is fatigued. Everyone's sort of over it. And I think also we're sort of just concerned about our health as well, right? So all those things sort of happening at the same time, and post-pandemic and not really post-pandemic, but sort of, the phase where we're entering back into the classroom. What I've recognized is that I've had to slow down, and I don't mean me personally, but I've had to sort of slow down with the curriculum. I've had to pull back. I've had to say, okay, instead of reading 2 to 3 articles today, we're going to read one play. The next class we meet this week, we'll read an essay to sort of accompany, or some type of another object of study to accompany the play that we're reading. And we'll sort of just take our time with it. And because students, I'm learning that they just don't have the capacity in this moment to take it all in. Now, I think that's at certain locations. I think that is, certain students. And then you have some students who are really excited and interested in the discipline. And so for me, I think that there's a larger sort of survey or audit that needs to happen about who we're letting into these programs and how we're sort of assessing them throughout the years. And the last thing I'll say is, I'll just give an example. I was at Columbia College in Chicago during the pandemic when it happened. And I remember I was talking about assessing students. How do we assess them to see how they're doing throughout the years they're there for an undergraduate program? And I sort of used the University of Maryland, where I got my PhD from, and I also was an adjunct there at one time. University of Maryland has a system where they have benchmarks every year that undergraduate students need to meet. And there's a larger conversation about where they are, feedback, what they need to do to sort of get where they need to be. And really a larger conversation sometimes where we'll tell a student, you're not doing as well as you could be. Let's sort of figure out how to get you sort of up to par. But at the same time, let's also have a conversation about whether you should be here in this particular program as a theater student, because sometimes students, they think they want to do something, they join the major, and 2 to 3 years in, they really don't want to be there and they really don't want to do that, but they feel lost, they feel trapped, they feel sort of imprisoned, and that they can't get out and do anything else. And so that is something that schools sort of need to, I think, take into consideration as well. So all that to say, I think, and then fast forward to where we are in the pandemic, I think that is sort of a little bit more heightened. We need to really sort of assess where students are and why they're in this major. I believe deeply that if you're in a major, you should love it, you should be excited about it, and you should have a desire that is going to push you intellectually, practically, and more specifically prepare you for some type of career where these things get to be used. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Marcy, how about you? What are you seeing in your classrooms?
Oh, I just have so many responses to what I just heard that are directly tied to what my students have said to me. Yesterday, I actually sat down with them, and last week, over the last couple of weeks, I've actually done some work with them on how many hours are you putting in for your job, for your studies, and how much of your week is that taking up, just to build a practical sense of what it is like to be in a production cycle while they're also working full time, essentially. And so what I'm trying to do these days with them, in person with them now, is to anchor them in the practical, in what it is like to work in the industry. The first thing that I would love to say is that yesterday, one of them said that the pandemic made them appreciate theater history so much more. This as a global statement for what I'm seeing from a lot of them, which is they're so happy to be back. What they learned, I think, is just like what a lot of us learned who were teaching online or in a hybrid, and being aware of fear, health factors, not being able to take attendance as part of our work in a class anymore, even though theater is experiential. You need to be there in order to exercise and practice the skills. We couldn't do that. The same thing was occurring over the course of the pandemic. I was learning how to do less. Flower Darby, and there's Thomas Tobin, who is actually on faculty at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, informed me about how to work during the pandemic when everybody's capacity was down. Small teaching is the key, but small teaching online was a real key. And we would pare down lessons so that key concepts would be transmitted, but they were digestible. And I've taken that into post-pandemic teaching because it's not just a matter of students' capacity, it's a matter of how they learn now. This is going everywhere. But I think that many of them have expressed how over the course of the pandemic, when they had to take classes online, and a lot of the generations of students that I'm working with either lost their senior year or they came to college and then lost time in person in college. And so they have expressed a lot of gratitude for being able to be back and being able to be in community. While at the same time, they learned what they really wanted to do. So they said, some of them have expressed how with the pandemic taking theater away, with not being able to be in a room and making stories in a room, they realized how much they wanted to do that. Mm-hmm. So the students who are there want to be there. And they have also expressed a lot of optimism or hope that those in other industries, that there's going to be a workforce of people who want to be doing the jobs they're doing in their generation, because they realized when you have nothing, what do you want to do? You want to explore your passions, one of them said actually yesterday, rather than what we need to do to survive, although that's absolutely important. So coming through the pandemic, and some, I think, they are more purposeful. They are much more vulnerable, but much more forthcoming about expressing their vulnerabilities and their frustrations, and much more driven about finding a way through.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask a sort of connected follow-up, especially because both of you are practicing freelance artists in the field, in addition to working in academia. And how much do you think the field has gone through so much re-examination during this time, starting with that sort of pause where we couldn't produce live, so much reinvention, so much discussion about what's an appropriate work-life balance, what percentage of your time, speaking to what you were talking about, Marcy, and tracking hours, what is an acceptable amount of time in a day, in a week, in a year to devote to your work. So all of that work-life balance and what's appropriate conversation in the field. Also, we see white American theater, grappling with inequity, injustice, white supremacy, all of that in our field. How does that impact the decisions we make? And how much are you seeing those conversations replicated or just sort of paid attention to? Is there an awareness of them amongst your students? And how is that changing things in the classroom for either of you? Khalid, you look like you've got to comment.
That's a good question. So I want to answer it this way. So there's sort of two answers, but they're related. The first one is this, and especially for students, when they are a part of a production on campus, like a campus production or, a department production and so forth, they don't see that as work. They see it as, and let me rephrase that. They enjoy the work differently. So of course you get the students who'll say, hey, I have tech, I have this, I have that. Can I miss class? That's a larger conversation. We'll figure that out as we move along. I walk into, we just did a torch song here at University of Georgia, and they're in rehearsal for another show right now. And then they're gearing up to do night song next semester, a little night music, excuse me. I'm getting my shows mixed up. A little night music, which I may be dramaturging. So I've been doing some work with directors around that. And so when I walked into class, for instance, last Thursday, they were all discussing it. And so they're excited about that kind of work. Right? And so for them, they don't see it as labor in the way in which people a little bit older in their 30s and 40s and older in 50s and 60s, how we see work. Where we go, I don't care what this is. I need a break. I'm taking off next week. I need a vacation. Next month, I'm taking off 2 weeks, whatever the case may be. When it comes to like their studies, they see that as work. And sometimes you have to have the conversation with them about, well, this is work. It is an intellectual work And it is a muscle. The phrase that I use all the time with them is, it is a muscle that you have to sort of flex. And it is a practice that you have to rehearse often. You have to practice and rehearse this often. Whether that in like, because reading a play, reading critical scholarship, it takes a particular kind of set of skills. And we have to rehearse and we have to practice. And the classroom is where we come together and sort of do a dry run, right? And I try to sort of use that phrasing. Some of them get it. Some of them are like, yeah, I get it. And then I often say, and I'm giving you tools, just like our discipline at large, you can take with you for any classroom or any sort of other area where it can work. But and so students see it differently, right? And yeah, that's I just sort of want to think about it that way in the context of work and how they see work today. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Marcy? How are they talking about these bigger issues?
They reflect the broader conversation that I think the industry has had, which is, it was great. We had some wonderful discussions when we were all at home, and now where is it being executed?
Mm-hmm.
Where is the change happening?
Mm-hmm.
And that there's some frustration at that because, but also there's some necessity for, as we all came back, we accelerated in some cases too quickly. And in some cases we accelerated out of necessity.
Yep.
For the survival of a department, for the survival of the program itself. And so that balance is something, that imbalance in the broader industry is something that the students see and are very outspoken about. At the same time, they're very grateful that they're there. So to jump on the conversation about what they perceive as work,
right.
A lot of them realized, well, it's different at the two universities that I'm at now. One university, it's more like I said, look at rehearsal, performance, studies,
mm-hmm.
Class hours, and then any other job you have.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the first time that a lot of them, several of them said, "Oh, wait, yeah, do we count rehearsal as yes?" Yes, as future professionals, this is your job, but also your research time. This is a side note. I've had students who hadn't been in the university library until my class. And they're years in. They're a couple years in. So to teach and to teach where there are resources for them to be able to put into practice the period work that they're doing, the contemporary work that they're doing. That's been a big thing. But there's some things that they haven't perceived as work, yes, because they're excited about it, but also they haven't seen the broader picture and are starting to, I think, see the broader picture of, oh, this takes time, and how do we balance? So in my own small way, I'm trying to say here's how you can pursue that balance is really by respecting your art as your work and your vocation as your work. Right. It is your work.
Right.
So start thinking of it now in that way, and you'll be able to better sift out and sort out.
Yeah. If I can I add on to what you're saying here? Mm-hmm. Is the library part is so true. I like the thing that gets me a lot with students is they'll say, "Can you give me a list of plays?" And I go, "I can give you a list of plays, but there is a library that you pay for. There's also a free library in most cities, big or small, have free libraries. There's online tool. I mean, there's resources. Just go and read plays. Do like I used to do. I used to go to and so just go and read plays, and then you come and tell me what you've read recently. I have not read all plays, and so we can sort of swap, right? Mm-hmm. And to some degree, I think they see that as a form of labor, going to the library. They don't, and they may see it as a form of labor, but I often think they see it as a form of labor that doesn't, in some ways, pay them back, or that they're not compensated for, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, I'm going to go do this, but why? And so the issue here, I think, is the larger issue is really about academia in general.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I think we all can have conversations about academia and the ways in which it is, a capitalist enterprise today and yada, yada, yada. And guess what? I'm still a part of it and I teach there. Um, I'm also in the arts and humanities, so I don't make a lot of money, right? So I'm also thinking about like what area that I'm in. And I'm also in a very underfunded discipline. I just want to put that out there. At every school I've been a part of, I've always been in the underfunded discipline, right? And that is in terms of what we get to take care of our students, put in our productions, the resources and all that, to even my own paycheck. It's always underfunded. But I do it because I love it, right? And that's what I want the students to get and sort of understand, right? You do this because you love it, because you like it. The other thing is that students, I remember when I was an undergrad, and I wasn't the best student, as I said earlier. I was not the best student, but I was a good student. I did what I needed to do to get by. But when it came to my theater classes, I was always 100 on point. Is what I wanted to do. But I also had professors that I loved, and there was a sort of a relationship that I built with them. There was a trust, right? Which is important, especially in theater. And I remember when she said, as a theater student, you need to know all these plays, you need to know all this. Now, and granted, she gave us a canon. And today, as a scholar, as someone on the other side, I can critique what she sort of taught in her philosophy. But I know my classics, right? I know my dramatic criticism. I know theater history. She would say, read a play a day. And I did. I still have my Living Theater History textbook, edition 1. When I was an undergrad, it's like edition 6 now. From when I was an undergrad, and I would write, every time I read a play, I would write it in the cover of the book. So both covers are like filled with plays that I've read. But my point is that I just would every morning get up and read a play because I just enjoyed it. I fell in love with Oscar Wilde. I fell in love with Chekhov. I fell in love with Brecht, right? I fell in love with Lon Elder and Douglas Turner Ward, right? Like, and maybe not even understanding fully what those plays, what was happening in those plays. I remember reading Chekhov. I don't know if it's Three Sisters, Cherry Orchard, and just kept saying, what is the strap at the end of the play? The strap, what is the sound of the strap? I don't get it. Now I understand that it's about metaphor. I understand that Chekhov is actually comedy. Like there's so many things I get now, right? Because I'm older, more experienced. But I want students to sort of start somewhere and have a foundation. And it just seems like it is hard, not for all, but for many, for our discipline. And so I think, what I'm trying to get to, and Marcella, I'm sort of bouncing off what you sort of hinted at a little bit, right? Is that there might need to be like an audit or an assessment of the discipline as a whole, and sort of what we are doing, what we are doing and why we're doing it, and who we're allowing in to be a part of this very precious thing. I think theater is precious, and I don't want everybody to be a part of it. You need to earn your way in, and not in some like, scolding student learning method form, but sort of like you need to sort of prove that you should be here. In many ways. Yeah, I just want, that's sort of like where my mind is going. Marcella, you got me thinking about this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing to see. I have students who I'll mention a name and they'll say, what's that name? And, there are things that I can only touch on the tip of the iceberg about, and I'll have to give them a text and they'll write down, they'll take pictures of the books that I bring in. So I love that they are self-driven, those who are self-driven, who want more resources. That's just going to be to their advantage. But they're also, this is a detour a little bit, but they're also, they've expressed how sometimes it's hard to be studying, to be so immersed in the workload that they are impatient to be following their vocation, which is storytellers in the community. They want to be involved in the community, and they're finding their time is too small right now to do so. So I think that's another frustration they express. Yeah. But I do want to say something about the way that they learn too. So as they're finding more resources beyond what we can give them, and I think understanding that we can't give them everything, but we can drive them to do so on their own. That one of them actually expressed yesterday that he's seeing something which I think I've been trying very hard to do, and I think some educators are. In fact, Marquette University had a lot of professors contribute essays to a book that they published called On the Vocation of the Educator in This Moment, about how the pandemic had changed their teaching. Mm-hmm. And one of the things they're saying is that they're starting to see and I think this speaks to also how this generation learns and how they would like to learn. They'd like to be involved. They're seeing professors pushing them to learn how to learn, which over the course of the last several years and they've expressed it themselves with teachers having to teach to the test, mm-hmm. with a more passive mode of taking in information, that they are learning how to become active, self-driven learners in some way, but also how empowered they feel when they are given opportunity to pursue things that they want to learn. So one class that I have, I'm asking them, like, their final project is they have to propose a playwright to put on the syllabus. So they actually are contributing to future iterations of this class. Right. And that kind of participatory work is, I think, what, one of them expressed appreciation for choice, but because it allows them to follow their own curiosity. And then we'll see where that curiosity leads. Right.
Mm-hmm. Another thing I'm curious about, because I'm sure that you are both having conversations with your students, maybe as part of the curriculum and maybe just, tops and tails of class sessions, about what they're feeling, those who intend to join this field post-education. And what are you hearing from them about their thoughts about joining this field as a prospect for their livelihood, for their vocation, and as well as for a sort of calling and an art? I'm curious what that generation is thinking about this industry in our country.
Mm-hmm.
So my experience has been that, let's say you have 100 theater majors, 25 of them have expressed an interest to move forward. 5 of them have expressed interest to get an MFA and to further their training. 10 of them have expressed interest to go and just start working, primarily as tech design, sort of, they can mm-hmm. sort of figure out things as they navigate. They're interested in sort of there are 3 of us living in an apartment. We're never home. I'm always in the theater kind of career, which actually is kind of fun. I used to want that mm-hmm. as well. And then the other 5 are sort of like, I am trying to figure this out, but I know I want to do this. The other 75 are like, yeah, I'll probably end up going to business school, law school, or something. Mm-hmm. On one level, I'm always like, oh, that's great. I'm glad you have a future. But it sort of saddens me, though, because sometimes I'm like, well, why not stay with theater? I thought this is what you wanted to do for the past 3 to 4 years that I've known you. We've been working together, be it in the classroom, be it in rehearsals, be it, I often bring students on to dramaturgy gigs with me, be it sort of working that, but I thought this is what you wanted to do. And they go, yeah, I did like it, but no, I decided to move on. And that saddens me, because I wonder then who's going to take over the field, who's going to move on, who's going to be the new artists are we grooming new artists? Are we grooming new designers? Are we grooming new educators? Are we grooming new artistic directors and so forth? And it's kind of scary, actually, because it's not an abundance of students that I thought it would be based off of who's registered versus who then, when we do a 5 to 6 year assessment of alum who actually have gone on to get careers in the field, regardless of what that is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Marcy?
I see among actors a hunger for connection.
Yeah.
And for connection to theaters in the market, a need for guidance on what the next steps are. And some universities provide that bridge via showcase or career prep classes or things like that. And some universities are very, very, I don't want to say aggressive, but they're very assertive about trying to connect their students to the wider industry. And some it's the process is more the focus, where they can put their educators' resources rather than sending them on. And so what I see a lot of my students experiencing is, where are the general auditions? What do you think I should do? What are the markets like right now? They want to know. And so I don't know, Jen, you may get an email from somebody sometime saying, hey, may I have a conversation with you?
I'm here.
But also, thank you. But also, I have seen, especially as we know, we are experiencing such a dearth of stage managers, technical directors, other designers and technicians and managers in the field, that whenever I see a student who has some facility and interest, I cheer on the inside, and I want to, I want to do the same thing that I want to do for actors, which is connect them. And in some cases, they have those connections. In some cases, they don't. So we need to bridge ourselves. Those of us in the professional theater need to connect ourselves to our schools close by, and work to encourage those who are hungry.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I would agree.
Well, as we start to maybe wrap up this conversation, we could clearly talk about this for about 3 straight days, but we'll start to wind this down. But I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about what you see coming next in this evolution. Again, pandemic's not over, but we are certainly going into this next phase, this next new normal. You can't see my air quotes, but I'm air quoting it.
Yes.
What do you think comes next in theater education?
Mm.
Maybe that's too big a question.
I think that with a lot of departments having been compressed because of budget during the pandemic, a lot of training programs are really trying to find their way back to being able to be there for students. In some cases, I think students are hungry or frustrated with opportunity that is not necessarily there because the department's been hit. But also, with that aside, what I see is a need for, and I do see this occurring, a need for departments to cultivate their best practices for working with sometimes an understaffed department to be able to offer students the guidance that they need, to be able to look at curriculum and what should be on the canon to teach. Now, I think that it's a little glacial. Right. It's happening, but it's happening. What is there, and I think that the departments will find that the students are very outspoken about, and because they care, outspoken about what they think is worth pursuing. I don't know what that means for the future health of departments, but the acceleration back into in-person work is excellent, and the conversation is not done.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I would agree. I would agree. I think that we are. I think in many ways we are learning. We're sort of getting back to some degree. We're getting back to why we do what we do. Mm-hmm. By that I mean, many of us did not go into theater, as capitalists, as those that are attempting to make so much money. I mean, we got to live, we got to eat. We do want nice lives and things of that nature, and be able to afford to take care of our families and so forth. But what I'm saying is, many of us did not go into this to have commercial success in the context of like Broadway and mainstream theater and so forth. And if that is what you're interested in, great, right? And I think you should thrive with that, right? But I guess what I'm trying to get to is that the arts, we just don't make a lot of money in the arts. It's always an up and down thing. And celebrities are a bit different, right? In the ways in which we create celebrities, right? So with that being said, I think we are sort of returning back to a period where we're learning to be resilient. Even though sometimes you don't want to be resilient, sometimes you just want to have resources and just say, gosh, I got a pocket of money and that someone donated and we're going to do this big thing. But even that big thing is a venture for like community and so forth, a festival and so forth for new artists or new playwrights, right? So there's still a way in which we're taking those donations and those funds and sort of putting them back out, right, to create opportunities for people. So it sort of goes hand in hand. But what I think what I'm getting to then is like we're learning, like students are interested in devising. Students are interested in, they're recognizing how the tech and design areas, they don't necessarily have to be working in theater strictly, but they can take those practices and go and work elsewhere. But they can always say, my training was in theater. So in many ways, it legitimizes the field and the areas and the study and the degree that you'll get, be it undergrad or graduate. And the last thing I'll say is this, disability in theater is a major area in terms of study and practice, but it hasn't gotten as much light as it should have. And it's happening now. It's happening now. I'm actually going to go into a conversation in a few weeks with a scholar of disability studies, Samuel Yates, and we're going to do a conversation about it. But what I'm trying to get to is that we're learning but disability is not simply someone who is physically disabled. Like the pandemic, for example, those who were unable or still are unable to just navigate the world as we did yesteryears because of the pandemic, right? And that is something we have to think about and include. And so now you have people in theater and performance who are thinking about how to make our audience spaces more inclusive, how to make the rehearsal rooms more equitable, right? Not simply in terms of funding, finances, and paychecks, right? But who has access and can be in the rooms with us because there is, they have, they're immunocompromised, or a simple fact, we just don't want you to get sick because there is a pandemic and we're not out of it, right? And so you have people now who are starting to think about those, and those conversations are happening in the classrooms as well as in the rehearsal spaces, as well as in, at theater companies such as Forward, right? A major conversation. We're still getting emails about the next few weeks, right? As we move into tech and opening night and so forth, and requiring audiences to wear masks as a form of empathy for our performers, right? Because also our performers, this is their livelihood. So we need the audience members to wear the mask to protect them so that they can continue to make money, right? Once this show is over, they can move on to the next show. Or the simple fact that this show can keep running. So I think that's sort of where we're going. It's where we are. And I think it's also going to push the conversation a bit more deeper. And lastly, we're slowing down. I think that might be a good thing. I am someone who can't handle 6 to 7 shows in 3 to 4 months. I can't do it. Working on them, singing them, as a dramaturg, as a director, I can't handle it. It might be my age. I'm slowing down a little bit. I'm getting older. It might be the South because I'm down here now and everybody's slower. But it's nice to sort of sit and say, we're going to spend 3 months or 6 weeks, 2 months on this show. Take a little break and then get to the next one. And that's kind of nice. Yeah.
I love that. Ooh, so much to chew on here, and we will have to talk with both of you again soon. But I think we've been going for a while, so I'm going to say that is all for this episode of Theater Forward, a conversation about theater in Wisconsin, the Midwest, and America. Thank you so much for joining us, Khalid and Marcy, and everybody listening. We're so grateful. I'm Jenna Poff-Gray. Our podcast is produced by Scott Hayden. You can follow us or share your thoughts on Facebook or Twitter at Theater Forward, as always spelled with an ER.
Yes.
If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or any other preferred platform. Please reach out to us if you have comments or questions. And again, we're just so grateful to have you listening, and we will be back soon for another Theater Forward conversation.